So what happens when a very public, very brutal courtroom takedown starts to collide with a totally separate, quiet legal crisis that's been simmering behind the scenes? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at how two different legal battles, one involving Laura Loomer and the other Melania Trump, are starting to create this perfect storm of political pressure. Let's get into it.
You know, it all started right here. Not with some big explosion, but with a heavy, sudden silence. You could have heard a pin drop. It's that kind of quiet that just screams that the whole script has been flipped, and what was supposed to be a routine day in court is about to become a major, major public event.
So this is the big question we're trying to answer, right? How did a single heated moment in a courtroom not only go viral, but also somehow get tangled up with this other, completely different high-stakes situation? We're going to unpack that.
Okay, so part one. Our story really kicks off with this single explosive event. A public takedown that didn't happen on social media or in an interview, but live inside a courtroom. You know how these things usually go. It was all very formal, very predictable, lawyers making their points, papers shuffling around, but you could just feel this tension building onto the surface, and wow, it was about to break in a way I don't think anyone saw coming. Here's the play-by-play of how it all went down. First, you have Laura Loomer's legal team, and they're presenting their argument. They seem pretty confident, pretty firm. Then boom, the interruption. The judge doesn't just disagree, he cuts them off, and his tone is sharp, impatient. And that leads to the final step, a complete dismantling of their entire case, piece by painful piece for everyone to see. It was just a total collapse right there in open court.
And let me tell you, the people who were actually in the room, their descriptions say it all. They didn't just call it a bad day for the legal team. The words they used were uncomfortable and brutal. That tells you this went way beyond a simple legal disagreement. The judge's critique was just unfiltered.
And of course, in this day and age, a moment like that never, ever stays in the courtroom. Within hours, clips were flying, commentary was everywhere. What was a legal proceeding suddenly became a public story, a narrative being defined by those few, incredibly critical minutes. But that was really just the beginning of it all.
Because, while all eyes were glued to that courtroom drama, a second, very different kind of storm was quietly gathering strength in the background.
And that other situation involves Melania Trump. It's tied to some of the ongoing legal issues surrounding her husband. Now, at first glance, you'd think these two cases have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But as little details in her situation started to shift, a deeper connection began to form. Not a legal one, but one based on this shared atmosphere of just intense, mounting pressure. This slide really lays it out perfectly. Loomer's situation was a spark. It was public, it was immediate, it was explosive. Melania's, though, is what you'd call a slow burn. It's way less visible, much more gradual, and it's developing through these subtle little shifts instead of one big dramatic clash. And don't let that slow burn fool you, because it has its own set of dangers. See, the pressure builds quietly, in layers. Perception starts to become just as powerful as the actual facts of the case. Every single move, and even every moment of silence, gets put under a microscope. And honestly, that's why a lot of people think this kind of quiet buildup can actually be way more dangerous in the long run. So how in the world do these two totally different stories, the spark and the slow burn, actually start to connect? Well, it all comes down to pressure.
And here's the crucial thing to understand. The connection isn't some direct link between the cases themselves. It's not like they're legally related. Instead, they're joined by this shared environment, this feeling of intense legal scrutiny, incredibly high stakes, and this growing sense that, honestly, anything could happen next.
When you step back, you start to see these common threads weaving them together. Both situations are dealing with intense public scrutiny. Both are under immense legal pressure. Both have become a battle to control the public narrative. And in both cases, people are now asking some really serious questions about strategy, about credibility, and about what the next move is going to be.
An observer actually used this metaphor, and I think it's perfect. They said it's like watching two storms form on the horizon. Each one is a big deal on its own, but watching them both develop at the same time, it just creates this overwhelming feeling of unpredictability. And this is the question that's just hanging over everything, this kind of compounding pressure. It can't last forever. Sooner or later, something or someone is going to have to give.
Which brings us to the final, and maybe the most important part of all this. What happens now? What's the potential fallout from these two storms that are clearly on a collision course?
Let's be really clear about this metaphor we've been using. That courtroom takedown,
That was the spark. It was a single, visible event that made headlines. But that spark could ignite a fire. We're talking widespread consequences that are so much bigger and way, way harder to control.
This table breaks down what each woman is up against right now. For Laura Loomer, the challenge is all about rebuilding credibility after such a public beatdown. The risk for her is that this one bad moment becomes a pattern in people's minds. For Melania Trump, the challenge is trying to contain the story around her legal situation. The risk there is that her quiet, slow burn problem suddenly explodes into a public firestorm she's worked so hard to avoid.
And that's exactly where we are right now. This isn't some future prediction. We're in a whole new phase for both of these stories. From here on out, every single decision is magnified. The stakes are just getting higher, and the cost of one wrong move is greater than it's ever been. So if you take one thing away, it should be this. The fight is happening on two fronts. The winners and losers here won't just be decided by legal arguments inside a courtroom. They'll be decided by the battle for public perception happening outside of it. And right now, both of those battles are fully underway.
And that really leaves us with one last big question. Was that crazy courtroom moment the climax of this whole story? Or was it just the spark that's about to ignite the real, lasting consequences? We might only be seeing the very beginning of the true fallout.